The year was 1794, when the sprawling wilderness of the Ohio Territory represented both promise and peril for those brave enough to venture westward. For settlers seeking new beginnings on America's frontier, hope could transform into horror. With the crack of a single rifle shot, this is the story of Eleanor Blackwood, who watched her world collapse in a single blood-soaked dawn, and the Shawnee scout named River Walker, whose discovery of a grieving woman inside a hollow sycamore would forever alter both their destinies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The blood on Eleanor Blackwood's hands had dried to a deep crimson, flaking away as she clutched the small silver locket her mother had given her before they'd left Pennsylvania. 2 days had passed since the attack. 2 days of hiding inside the massive hollow sycamore, pressing her fist against her mouth to muffle her sobs as the sounds of death and its aftermath surrounded her. The Thompson wagon train, 23 settlers bound for the rich valleys near Fort Hamilton, had been ambushed in the misty half-light of dawn by men whose identities remained hidden behind cloth masks and war paint. Eleanor had been gathering water from a nearby stream when the first shots tore through the morning stillness. The thunderous crack of rifles shattered the quiet dawn, followed by screams that would haunt her for however long she had left to live. She had dropped instantly to the ground, her body responding before her mind could process what was happening. Years spent hunting with her father had taught her to move silently through woodlands. Now those skills kept her alive as she crawled through the damp undergrowth away from camp, but not far enough to avoid witnessing the slaughter. Now she was, alone in the Ohio wilderness, a place where ancient trees stretched endlessly overhead, making her feel smaller with each passing hour. Her chestnut hair hung in dirty tangles around her face, once neatly pinned, but now wild and matted with bits of bark and leaves. Her indigo calico dress was torn at the hem, stained with dirt and damp spots that might have been blood. Some hers, some not. The early October wind cut through her clothing like a blade. Winter came early to these territories, and Eleanor knew that if starvation didn't claim her first, the cold surely would. She had taken what little she could from the massacre site after the attackers left. A canteen half full of water, a small pouch of cornmeal she'd found, spilled near what remained of their wagon, and her father's hunting knife, which she'd pulled from the chest of a man she could only assume was one of the attackers. Nothing else had been salvageable. The raiders had been thorough in their destruction, burning wagons and scattering what supplies they didn't take for themselves. The bodies of her fellow travelers lay where they had fallen, already becoming prey for scavengers that grew bolder as the hours passed. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, her voice raspy from thirst and disuse. "Just keep moving." But toward what? Eleanor had no clear destination, only the vague understanding that she needed to find a settlement, a trading post, or any sign of civilization. The Thompson wagon train had been following the Great Miami River, aiming to reach Fort Hamilton before winter set in, but in her panic and confusion after the attack, she'd lost track of the river. Each step was becoming more difficult than the last. Her boots, crafted for town life rather than wilderness trekking, had rubbed raw blisters on her heels that burst and bled anew with every step. On the second day after the attack, Eleanor found herself stumbling through a dense grove of massive sycamores. One particular tree, ancient and imposing, had split long ago, hollowed by time and weather into a natural shelter large enough to hold her. Exhaustion overtaking her, she crawled inside, finding surprising comfort in the wooden womb of the old tree. The knife she carried offered little comfort against the vastness of the wilderness or the threats it contained. As twilight approached on this third day, Eleanor ventured out from her hollow sanctuary to gather what water remained in cupped leaves from an afternoon rainfall. She had no means to start a fire, The flint had been in her father's pack, and Jeremiah Blackwood's body lay back at the massacre site, eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. Jeremiah Blackwood had been a carpenter from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, full of dreams about building a new community on the frontier. After Eleanor's mother died of fever the previous winter, he had convinced Eleanor that a fresh start in the Ohio Territory was what they both needed. The wagon train journey was supposed to be the beginning of their new life, not the end of everything she'd ever known. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, interrupted by the distant howl of wolves and the constant gnawing fear that kept her heart racing. When dawn broke, Eleanor forced herself from the hollow tree, despite the protests of her aching body. The morning was grey, the sun hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds that threatened rain. She allowed herself a small sip from the canteen, rationing what little water remained, before steeling her resolve. Her father had always said she had a stubborn streak wider than the Susquehanna. It was time to prove him right. By midday, the clouds had opened, releasing a steady cold rain that soaked through her clothing and chilled her to the bone. Eleanor's pace slowed, her boots sliding in the mud, each step requiring more effort than she could afford to expend. Still, she pushed forward, following a gradual downward slope in hopes it would lead to water. It was during a brief respite from the rain that she spotted it, a thin column of smoke rising in the distance, barely visible against the grey sky. Her heart leapt into her throat. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. People meant either salvation or danger. Eleanor hesitated, debating whether to approach or avoid the smoke. Who might be waiting there? Settlers, soldiers, the very men who had attacked her wagon train. Desperation won out over caution. She would die out here alone, that much was certain. Whatever waited at that fire couldn't be worse than freezing to death in this vast emptiness. She altered her course, heading toward the smoke with renewed purpose. The rain began again, harder now, but she barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on that distant promise of life. What she didn't notice were the eyes watching her from a ridge nearly a quarter-mile away. A solitary figure tracked her movement through the rain-swept landscape. He had been following her faint trail for nearly a day, reading the story of her desperate flight in the bent grasses and dragging footprints she left behind. Nathan Hawke lowered the brass spyglass and frowned. The woman was heading straight for a camp whose occupants he recognized as part of the Malone gang, notorious throughout the territory for their raids on both settlers and native villages. She was walking from one death into another. He tucked the brass spyglass, acquired years ago in trade for prime beaver pelts, into the leather pouch at his side. Rain dripped from the brim of the wide-brimmed hat he wore, a concession to the weather rather than any desire to adopt white man's fashion. Nathan was Shawnee from the Thawakila division, though he had spent much of the past decade moving between worlds, hunting, trading, occasionally serving as a scout for the army when it suited his purposes. He had been tracking deer when he discovered the massacre site the previous day. The brutality of the attack had told him immediately it wasn't the work of his people or any other tribe he knew. The bodies had been stripped of valuables but left otherwise intact, with no ceremonial treatment. No tribal warrior would waste such resources or show such disrespect. This was the work of white men preying on their own kind, bandits using the convenient excuse of Indian attacks to cover their crimes. He had found her trail leading away from the site, small footprints, uneven, clearly made by someone exhausted and frightened. Following her hadn't been a conscious decision, merely an extension of his curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, something he wasn't ready to acknowledge. Now, watching her stumble toward danger, Nathan knew he had a choice to make. Leave her to her fate. After all, she was not his responsibility, not his people, or intervene in ways that could bring him nothing but trouble. The rain continued to fall, washing away any easy answers, leaving only the hard truth that the woman wouldn't survive another night alone in the wilderness. Nathan stood, adjusted the rifle slung across his back, and began to move. Whatever decision he had just made, even he wasn't entirely sure of his reasons. But as the distance between them closed, he knew that both their fates had just become entangled in ways neither could yet understand. Eleanor's vision blurred as she pushed forward through the tall prairie grass that had replaced the dense forest. The distant smoke was her only beacon in the gathering dusk. Her legs trembled beneath her, threatening to buckle with each step. The rain had stopped, but the damage was done. Her clothes clung to her skin, drawing precious warmth from her body. With every gust of wind, the small knife clutched in her right hand offered little reassurance, but she gripped it tighter as she approached what appeared to be a clearing ahead. The smell of wood smoke grew stronger, mixing with another scent that made her empty stomach clench: roasting meat. She paused at the edge of the clearing, partially concealed by a cluster of sumac. Through the branches, she could make out 2 crude lean-tos arranged beside a fallen tree. 5 men moved about the camp, rough-looking figures in buckskin and wool. A campfire blazed in the center, where something, perhaps a turkey, turned on a crude spit. Eleanor hesitated, doubt creeping in where desperation had led. There was something about these men that set off warnings in her mind. Their loud, coarse laughter carried to her hiding spot, along with fragments of conversation that made her skin crawl. Good haul from them wagons. Should have kept one of them women, though. Next time we won't be so hasty. The blood in Eleanor's veins turned to ice. These weren't potential saviors. These were the men who had murdered the Thompson party, her father, everyone she had known. She began to back away slowly, careful not to make a sound, when her foot caught on an exposed root. She stumbled, catching herself against a tree trunk, but not before dislodging a cascade of raindrops from the leaves above. One of the men turned toward the sound, his hand moving to the pistol at his belt. "Who's there?" he called, voice sharp with suspicion. "Show yourself!" Eleanor froze, terror locking her muscles in place. The man started toward her hiding spot, joined by another who carried a rifle. She knew she should run, but her body refused to obey, trapped between fear and exhaustion. "Check it out, Malone," the second man ordered. "Probably just a deer, but no sense taking chances." The man called Malone drew his pistol and advanced toward the tree line where Eleanor hid. In 20 more steps, he would discover her. In 30, she would be dead, or worse. A sharp whistling sound cut through the air, followed by a dull thud. Malone stopped abruptly, looking down at his chest in confusion. The shaft of an arrow protruded from between his ribs, its fletching trembling. With the impact, he opened his mouth as if to speak, but only blood emerged, spilling down his chin before he crumpled to the ground. Pandemonium erupted in the camp. The remaining men scattered for cover, grabbing weapons and shouting conflicting orders. Another arrow flew from somewhere to Eleanor's left, missing its target but sending the bandits into further disarray. "Indians!" one of them yelled. "Take cover!" Eleanor remained motionless, her mind struggling to process what was happening. The bandits' attention was no longer on finding her, but on the new threat. She needed to move, to escape while they were distracted, but which way was safe? A strong hand clamped over her mouth from behind, stifling the scream that rose in her throat. An arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her backward into the deeper shadows beyond the sumac. "Be still," a voice whispered in her ear, the English accented but clear, "or we both die." Eleanor's instinct was to struggle, to fight against this new captor, but the sound of gunfire from the camp made her reconsider. Whoever held her had just killed one of the men responsible for the massacre. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was not an enemy. She allowed herself to be pulled deeper into the woods, moving in a low crouch behind her mysterious rescuer. Only when they were several hundred yards from the camp did he release his hold on her. Eleanor spun around, knife raised defensively, and got her first clear look at the man. He was tall, with broad shoulders and the distinctive copper skin of the native peoples. His black hair was pulled back in a single braid, partially covered by a wide-brimmed hat that seemed oddly out of place with his otherwise traditional appearance. A bow was slung across his back alongside a rifle of European make, but it was his eyes that held her attention, dark, intelligent, and currently regarding her with a mixture of wariness and assessment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "They killed your people," he stated rather than asked. "At Wagon Place 2 suns ago." Eleanor nodded slowly, not lowering her knife. "Yes. How did you—" "Found dead. Saw your tracks." He gestured in the direction they had come. "Those men. Bad men. Not my people who attacked your wagons." "I know," Eleanor whispered, the knife wavering in her grip as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. "I heard them talking." The man studied her for a moment longer, then nodded once, as if coming to a decision. "Cannot stay here. They will search when they find courage again." As if to emphasize his point, another shot rang out from the direction of the camp, followed by shouting. The bandits were regrouping, perhaps preparing to hunt down whoever had attacked them. "I'm Eleanor," she said, lowering the knife finally. What choice did she have but to trust this stranger? "Eleanor Blackwood," the man touched his chest. "Nathan." Then, seeming to reconsider, he added, "White men call Nathan Hawk." "Thank you," Eleanor began, but her words died as her legs finally gave way beneath her. She crumpled toward the ground, the world spinning around her. Nathan moved with surprising speed, catching her before she could fall completely. "Too long without food, without rest," he observed, his expression unreadable in the deepening twilight. "Need a safe place." Despite her situation, despite everything, Eleanor felt a flicker of fear as this stranger, this native warrior, lifted her into his arms as easily as if she were a child. But she lacked the strength to protest, and somewhere in her mind, a voice whispered that if he had wanted to harm her, he could have done so already. Nathan carried her deeper into the woods, moving with a silent grace that seemed impossible for someone bearing her weight. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them as darkness settled completely over the land. Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, awareness coming in fragments, the steady rhythm of Nathan's breathing, the occasional snap of a twig beneath his feet, the stars appearing one by one through gaps in the canopy above. When she next opened her eyes fully, they were in a small ravine, sheltered by an overhanging rock formation. A tiny fire burned, carefully banked to produce minimal smoke. The warmth it radiated was the first real comfort Eleanor had felt in days. Nathan knelt beside her, offering a water skin. "Drink slowly," he instructed. She accepted it with trembling hands, taking careful sips of the cool water. Each swallow felt like life itself flowing back into her parched body. "Why?" she asked when she had drunk her fill. "Why help me?" Nathan sat back on his heels, considering her question with the same grave intensity he seemed to apply to everything. In the flickering firelight, she could see details she had missed before. A scar that ran along his jawline, the intricate beadwork on the medicine pouch that hung at his belt, the weariness in his eyes that spoke of a man who had seen too much. "Many reasons," he answered finally, "none simple." He reached into a leather bag and withdrew a strip of dried meat, offering it to her. "Eat, sleep. Tomorrow, words will come easier." Eleanor accepted the food, tearing off small pieces with her teeth, as she'd seen the men of the wagon train do with their jerky. The flavor was unfamiliar, but not unpleasant, gamey and smoky. As she ate, Nathan moved to the edge of their small camp, positioning himself where he could watch for any sign of pursuit. His profile against the night sky seemed as much a part of this wild landscape as the trees and rocks that surrounded them. Eleanor finished the meat and leaned back against the stone wall behind her, wondering at the strange turn her fate had taken. 3 days ago, she was Eleanor Blackwood, a carpenter's daughter heading toward a new life in the Ohio Territory. Now she was a survivor, dependent on the mercy of a man from a world as foreign to her as the moon. Sleep tugged at her heavier with each passing moment. As her eyes drifted closed, her last thought was of how quickly everything could change, how thin the line between life and death, between enemy and ally, between past and future. In her dreams, the massacre played out again and again. But this time, a figure watched from the shadows, a man with dark eyes and a wide-brimmed hat, witnessing her survival with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Dawn broke with a cold clarity that painted the forest in shades of amber and gold. Eleanor woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the rock shelter around her and the small fire that had burned down to glowing embers. Memory flooded back in a rush. The bandits, the arrow, the man called Nathan Hawke who had carried her to safety. She sat up slowly, muscles protesting after days of exertion and poor rest. Her clothes had dried overnight, stiff with dirt and other stains she preferred not to examine too closely. A quick assessment of her surroundings revealed that she was alone. Panic fluttered in her chest. Had Nathan abandoned her? She reached instinctively for the knife, finding it placed carefully, beside the water skin within easy reach. "You sleep like dead," came a voice from the entrance of the small shelter. Nathan ducked inside, carrying a handful of small brownish roots. "Good. Body needs healing." Relief washed over Eleanor, followed immediately by embarrassment at her reaction. "I thought that you'd left me." A hint of what might have been amusement touched his eyes. "No, went to find food, check for bad men." He knelt by the fire, adding small twigs to coax the embers back to life. They searched still, but go in the wrong direction. South. Eleanor watched as he set the roots near the growing flames. "What are those?" "Prairie potato, good food, medicine too." He glanced at her torn dress and the visible scratches on her arms. "Will help healing." While the roots cooked, Nathan produced a small clay pot from his pack and mixed water with some kind of dried herb. The resulting paste he offered to Eleanor, along with a questioning look. She hesitated only briefly before extending her arm, revealing a deep cut just below her elbow that had begun to show angry red lines extending from it. Nathan nodded grimly and began applying the paste with surprisingly gentle fingers. "Infection. Starts," he explained. "This will fight, but I need more. Have medicine at my camp." He finished treating her wound and sat back. "Can you walk today?" Eleanor flexed her feet, assessing the pain in her blistered heels. "Yes," she said with more confidence than she felt. "How far?" 3 days. Maybe 4. He studied her face. "For me, for you, maybe 6. The implied challenge in his words sparked something in Eleanor, a stubborn pride she had nearly forgotten during her days of desperate flight. "I can keep up." The hint of a smile ghosted across Nathan's face. "We see." They ate the prairie potatoes along with the last of Nathan's dried meat. The food, simple as it was, restored some of Eleanor's strength, though she knew it would take more than one meal to recover from her ordeal. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor found herself confronting a reality she'd been too exhausted to fully consider the night before. She was placing her trust, her life, in the hands of a man whose people were often portrayed as savages in the stories told around settler campfires. Yet this savage had shown more humanity than the white men who had murdered her father. "Why did you help me?" she asked again as Nathan extinguished the fire with handfuls of dirt. Truth has many sides like river stones. He seemed to debate with himself before continuing. I followed tracks from the wagon place. See, you're alone, hunted. His expression hardened. Those men, they kill my people too. Say Shawnee did it. Use fear of Shawnee to hide their crimes. Eleanor frowned. You were tracking them. The bandits. Nathan nodded once. For many moons they raid. They kill. They blame my people. Then white soldiers come, punish innocent villages. He shouldered his pack. You are a witness. You saw the truth. Maybe one day you will speak this truth. The weight of his words settled over Eleanor. She had never considered the consequences of the false attribution of attacks. How many innocent people on both sides had died because of such deceptions? I will, she promised, her voice strengthening with resolve. If I live to tell anyone about it. You live, Nathan said with quiet certainty. Now we go. They travelled northwest, keeping to ravines and sparse woodland, where possible to avoid being spotted. Nathan set a pace that was challenging, but not impossible, occasionally, slowing when he noticed Eleanor struggling. They spoke little. Conversation limited to practical matters, warnings about terrain, brief rests for water, instructions on which plants to avoid. By midday, Eleanor's body had settled into the rhythm of the journey, the consistent movement, actually easing some of the stiffness from her muscles. She found herself studying Nathan as they walked, the efficient grace of his movements, the constant awareness he maintained of their surroundings, the way he blended European and native elements in his dress and tools. You speak English well, she observed during a brief rest beside a small creek. Nathan gave her an appraising look, as if deciding how much to reveal. Lived at mission school 3 winters. Learned white man's words. White man's God. He dipped, his hand in the creek, letting the water flow through his fingers. Learned how white men think, useful knowledge. But you left, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. Mission wants Shawnee to become white inside, forget old ways. He touched the medicine pouch at his belt. Some ways should not be forgotten. Eleanor thought of her own education at the Ladies' Academy in Philadelphia, where she had been taught that civilization was a gift being bestowed upon the savage races. Now, facing the reality of the frontier, she wondered which world was truly savage. They continued their journey as afternoon. Shadows lengthened across the forest floor. Twice Nathan froze in mid-step, signaling for Eleanor to be still. Each time, after long moments of listening, he would relax slightly and gesture for them to proceed. She never asked what he had heard or sensed. Some things were better left unknown. As dusk approached, they reached a series of low hills dotted with oak and hickory. Nathan led her to a sheltered hollow where a natural spring bubbled up from between rocks, creating a small pool before trickling away downstream. Rest here, he announced, shedding his pack. Good water hidden. Eleanor sank gratefully to the ground, removing her boots to examine her feet. The blisters had broken and resealed several times during the day's journey, creating a painful patchwork of raw and calloused skin. She stifled a groan as she dipped her feet in the cool spring water. Nathan watched her for a moment, then disappeared into the gathering darkness. He returned shortly with a handful of broad leaves and some white chalky stones. Crouching beside the spring, he crushed the stones to powder and mixed it with the masticated leaves. For feet, he explained, offering the mixture to her. Will draw pain, help skin grow strong. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before applying the paste to her battered feet. The relief was almost immediate, a cooling sensation that dulled the throbbing pain. Thank you, she said, the words seeming inadequate for all he had done. You've been, she searched for the right word, kind. Nathan looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Is survival. You help me, I help you. How have I helped you? Eleanor asked, genuinely puzzled. He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he turned back to her, his expression serious in the deepening twilight. White woman alone on a prairie has many enemies. White woman with Shawnee scout has one more, but also has an ally who knows both worlds. He gestured to the vast landscape around them. This country bleeds from fighting between my people and yours. Maybe some must learn to walk between, to find a new path. The weight of his words settled over Eleanor as the first stars appeared overhead. She had lost everything she knew, yet here in this hollow, beside a spring, with a man from a world, she had been taught to fear. She felt the first tentative stirring of something unexpected. Not hope, it was too soon for that, but possibility, a future not yet written. As they prepared a small, smokeless fire for the night, Eleanor found herself wondering what that future might hold, and whether she would have the courage to walk. The path that was unfolding before her, one step at a time. Morning arrived with a layer of frost that glittered on the grass surrounding their camp. Eleanor woke to find Nathan already alert, watching the eastern horizon with a troubled expression. The paste on her feet had dried overnight, forming a protective crust that cracked when she moved. Beneath it, her skin felt less raw. The worst of the blisters beginning to heal. Storm coming, Nathan said, nodding toward a bank of dark clouds gathering in the distance. Bad timing. Eleanor followed his gaze, noting the ominous wall of grey approaching from the northwest. How far is your camp? Still 3 days, maybe more with storms. He handed her a small bundle of dried berries. Eat. Need strength today. The berries were tart but nourishing, easing the hollow feeling in her stomach. As she ate, Eleanor took stock of herself, the torn dress that hung loosely on her frame after days of little food, the tangled mess of her hair, the dirt embedded beneath her fingernails. She had never been particularly vain, but the physical transformation reflected a deeper change taking place within her. Can I? She gestured toward the spring, embarrassed but determined. I need to wash. Nathan nodded, understanding immediately. I will check the trail ahead. Return soon. He gathered his bow and slipped away through the trees, offering her privacy without needing to be asked. Eleanor waited until he was out of sight, then stripped off her filthy dress and undergarments. The water was breathtakingly cold, but she forced herself to endure it, scrubbing at her skin and hair with handfuls of sand from the spring's edge. The simple act of washing away days of grime felt like reclaiming a small piece of herself. She had just finished dressing when a sound caught her attention, a snapping twig, too heavy to be Nathan's careful footsteps. Eleanor froze, her gaze darting to where her knife lay beside her discarded boots. A man emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the spring, bearded, wearing a buckskin jacket stained with grease and gunpowder. One of the bandits from the Malone gang. His eyes widened when he saw her, surprise quickly replaced by a predatory smile. Well now, he drawled, hand moving to the pistol at his belt. Didn't expect to find a lady taking a bath out here. His gaze traveled over her with open hunger. You must be the one that got away from the wagons. Eleanor's mind raced. Nathan was too far to hear a call for help. The knife was several steps away. The bandit had a gun. Her options were few and desperate. Malone was right. Thought he heard something before that arrow took him. The man spat. On the ground. Where's your red-skinned friend, The one who's been leaving us little surprises. I don't know what you're talking about, Eleanor said, struggling to keep her voice steady. I'm alone. The man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the rocks surrounding the spring. Sure you are, darling, and I'm the King of England. He advanced slowly, pistol trained on her chest. Eleanor took a step back, then another, her mind frantically calculating distances to the knife, to the trees, to any possible escape. The bandits Eyes narrowed, tracking her movement. "Don't even think about running, girl. I'll put a ball in your back before you take 3 steps. His grin widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Now, I figure we got 2 options here. You can tell me where your Indian friend is hiding, or—" The twang of a bowstring interrupted whatever vile proposition he was about to make. The bandit staggered forward, eyes wide with shock as he reached behind him, fingers grasping at the arrow protruding from his back. His pistol discharged harmlessly into the ground as he fell to his knees. Nathan emerged from the trees like a shadow taking form, another arrow already nocked. The bandit tried to raise his pistol again, but Nathan's second arrow took him in the chest. He toppled face first into the spring, the clear water clouding with crimson. "We go. Now." Nathan's voice brooked no argument as he quickly gathered their belongings. "Others will hear shot. We'll come." Eleanor nodded, still shaking. As she pulled on her boots, "He found me by accident. I thought you said they were searching south." "Some clever, some circle back." Nathan handed her the knife, then gestured to the dead man. "Take his pistol. Powder dry?" Eleanor knelt beside the body, forcing down her revulsion as she pulled the pistol from the bandit's grasp. She checked. The powder horn at his belt. "Seems dry?" "Good. Might need." Nathan was already moving, setting a brisk pace away from the spring. "Follow close." They traveled in tense silence for nearly an hour, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the spring. The storm clouds continued to gather overhead, darkening the forest to a premature twilight. When the first fat raindrops began to fall, Nathan led her to a hollow tree, not unlike the one she'd sheltered in after the massacre, but larger, its massive trunk split and hollowed by lightning many years ago. "Wait here," he said as the rain intensified. "Must hide our trail." Eleanor huddled inside the tree as Nathan worked, watching through the opening as he used a branch to sweep away their tracks, then carefully rearranged fallen leaves to cover any remaining sign of their passage. By the time he joined her in the hollow tree, the rain had become a torrent, drumming against the forest canopy and sending rivulets of water streaming down the outside of their wooden shelter. The space was cramped, forcing them to sit close, shoulders touching. Eleanor could feel the tension in Nathan's body, the alertness that never seemed to leave him. For long minutes, the only sound was the rain and their breathing, gradually slowing as the immediate fear of pursuit receded. "You saved my life." "Again," Eleanor said quietly. "Thank you." Nathan inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement, but didn't speak. His eyes remained fixed on the forest beyond their shelter, watching for any movement that didn't belong. "My father," she began, then paused, unsure why she felt compelled to speak of him now. "My father always said, 'Fear is useful only if it makes you act.'" The memory came with unexpected clarity, her father teaching her to stitch a wound when she was 12, his patient instruction on how to overcome the natural fear of causing pain when the needle pierced skin. "Your father, he is a warrior." Nathan finally looked at her, something like genuine curiosity in his eyes. Eleanor almost laughed at the idea of Jeremiah Blackwood, Pennsylvania carpenter and Sunday school teacher, being described as a warrior. "No. He was a builder, but he believed in being prepared. I know how to survive." Her smile faded. "He died when—" She stopped, unable to complete the sentence. Nathan nodded, accepting this piece of her history without comment. After a moment, he reached into his pack and withdrew a small leather bundle. From it, he produced a piece of pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries pounded into a dense cake. "Last food," he said, breaking it in half and offering her the larger portion. "Save strength." The storm continued for hours, alternating between violent downpours and periods of steady rain. They remained in the hollow tree, speaking little, each lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor found herself studying Nathan's profile against the grey light from outside. The sharp line of his jaw, the slight hook of his nose, the single feather tied into his braid that moved gently with each breath. He was not what she had expected. None of this was what she had expected when she had agreed to join her father on the journey west. Life had a way of veering from its intended course, like a river changing its path after a storm. "When rain stops," Nathan said eventually, "we go north. Different way to my camp, safer. And if they find us before then?" His eyes met hers, steady and certain. "Then we fight together." The simple declaration settled over Eleanor like a blanket, warming something that had grown cold inside her since the massacre. Not just the promise of protection, but the acknowledgement of partnership. We, not I. Outside, the storm began to ease, the thunder rolling more distantly now. Soon they would need to move again, continuing this journey into the unknown. But for this moment, in this small wooden sanctuary with rain drumming a gentle rhythm against bark, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that perhaps survival was not the only possibility left to her. Perhaps there was still room for something more. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Morning revealed a world washed clean, the forest glistening under a pale blue sky. Puddles dotted the ground, reflecting the clouds that drifted overhead like scattered thoughts. Eleanor emerged from the hollow tree, muscles stiff from the cramped quarters. She stretched cautiously, testing her body's limits. To her surprise, she felt stronger than the day before. The combination of rest, food, and Nathan's medicinal treatments had begun to restore her. Nathan was already surveying their surroundings, his gaze sweeping the forest with practiced precision. "Good," he said after a moment. "Rain hides our trail, but also—" He pointed to the softened earth near the tree entrance, where clear footprints were visible. "Will show our new path." "Can we avoid leaving tracks?" Eleanor asked, eyeing the muddy ground with concern. "Not completely, but can confuse." He gestured for her to follow, leading her to a rocky outcrop that overlooked a small valley. "See there? Stream bigger now. From rain. We follow in water when we can, cross often, make the trail hard to read." The strategy made sense. Eleanor nodded, adding, "My father once told me that outlaws in the Carolinas would walk backward in their own footprints to fool trackers." Nathan gave her an appraising look. "Your father teaches many useful things." They set off at a steady pace, angling northeast toward the swollen stream that cut through the valley. The going was difficult, the ground treacherous with mud that clung to their boots and made each step an effort. Twice Eleanor nearly fell, saved only by Nathan's quick hand at her elbow. When they reached the stream, Nathan paused, studying the rushing water. "Current strong. You swim?" Eleanor hesitated. "A little, in ponds, never in running water." He nodded, considering. "We cross together. Hold here." He indicated a spot on his pack strap. "Step where I step." The water was shockingly cold, the current more powerful than it had appeared from the bank. Eleanor clutched Nathan's pack, her knuckles white with effort, as the water rose past her knees, then to her thighs. A misstep sent her staggering, but Nathan's arm shot back, steadying her before she could be swept away. They emerged on the far bank, soaked but safe. Eleanor's teeth chattered uncontrollably, her wet skirts clinging to her legs like a second skin. Nathan frowned at her shivering form. "Need dry clothes? Wet cloth steals warmth." He glanced at the sun's position. "My camp is still far. May need to make a fire." "No," Eleanor insisted through chattering teeth. "Too dangerous. I'll dry as we walk." Nathan studied her for a moment, then shrugged out of his buckskin jacket. "Wear this. Wet, but still holds warmth." When she hesitated, he added, "Not a request. Necessity." The jacket was heavy on her shoulders, still damp from their crossing, but significantly warmer than her sodden dress. It smelled of wood smoke, pine, and something else, a musky, earthy scent that was distinctly Nathan. They continued along the stream for nearly an hour, crossing back and forth at Nathan's direction, sometimes walking directly in the shallow parts of the water. Eleanor soon understood his strategy. Anyone tracking them would find a confusing pattern of appearing and disappearing footprints, making it impossible to determine a clear direction. By midday, the sun had risen high enough to warm the air, and Eleanor's clothes had begun to dry. Her spirits lifted with the temperature, a cautious optimism taking root. Perhaps they would reach Nathan's camp safely after all. "How did you learn to track so well?" she asked during a brief rest. "Is it something all your people know?" Nathan took a sip from his waterskin before answering. "All Shawnee children learn to read signs, animal tracks, weather signs, movement in grass. But my uncle was chief scout for many winters, taught me more." A shadow crossed his face. "Taught me to read white men too." "Your uncle," Eleanor ventured carefully, noting his use of past tense. "Is he—" 2 winters passed. Nathan's voice was flat, but his fingers tightened around the waterskin. "Soldiers came to the village, said Shawnee raid white settlement. Uncle tried to explain, show proof was not our people." His jaw tightened. "They did not listen." Eleanor felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "The soldiers killed him." "No, I did not hold a rifle." "No, but white settlers did. Same kind of men who attacked your wagon train." She hesitated, then added, "The same men who've been causing this hatred, haven't they? Creating conflicts between your people and mine. Some men profit from fear," Nathan replied. "Fear makes walls between people. Walls hide truth." They walked in silence after that, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The landscape gradually changed, the dense forest giving way to a rolling prairie dotted with stands of cottonwood and oak. Nathan grew more alert as they entered this more exposed terrain, his hand often resting on his knife or moving to the bow slung across his back. Late in the afternoon, they crested a small rise, and Nathan suddenly dropped to a crouch, signaling for Eleanor to do the same. He pointed to a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. "Fire," he whispered. "Not my camp." Too soon. Eleanor's pulse quickened. "The bandits, maybe? Or travelers?" Or he frowned, studying the smoke pattern. Army patrol. Neither option was reassuring. If it was the bandits, the danger was obvious. But an army patrol might be equally threatening to Nathan if they held prejudices against natives, and possibly to Eleanor as well if they didn't believe her account of the massacre. "We go around," Nathan decided. "Wide circle. More walking, but safer." The detour took them through a marshy area where the footing was uncertain, and clouds of insects swarmed around their faces. Eleanor swatted futilely at the buzzing pests, trying to maintain her composure despite the discomfort. She would not complain, would not be a burden. Nathan moved ahead, testing the ground with a stick to avoid the deeper mud patches. He had just helped Eleanor across a particularly treacherous spot when he suddenly stiffened, his head turning sharply toward a clump of reeds to their left. Eleanor followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. "What is it?" Instead of answering, Nathan slowly reached for his bow, notching an arrow with practiced ease. His eyes never left the reeds, which now seemed to be swaying slightly despite the lack of wind. A tense moment passed. Then the silence was shattered by a guttural growl as a massive shape burst from the reeds, a mountain lion, its tawny fur dark with mud, eyes glinting with rage at the intrusion into its territory. Nathan loosed his arrow, the shaft embedding itself in the cat's shoulder. The animal roared in pain but didn't slow, charging directly toward them with terrifying speed. "Run!" Nathan shouted, pushing Eleanor toward higher ground as he knocked another arrow. Eleanor stumbled backward, her boot catching in the mud. She fell hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Through dazed eyes, she saw Nathan standing his ground, firing a second arrow that found its mark in the mountain lion's chest. Still, the cat came on, seemingly unstoppable in its fury. Nathan drew his knife, a pitiful weapon against such a predator, and braced himself for the impact. In that moment, with clarity born of desperation, Eleanor remembered the pistol taken from the dead bandit at the spring. She had tucked it into the pocket of Nathan's jacket, which she still wore. Her fingers closed around the cold metal, pulling it free as she struggled to her knees. The mountain lion was upon Nathan now, its massive paws swinging in a deadly arc. Nathan ducked beneath the blow, slashing upward with his knife, but the movement put him off balance. The cat's second swing caught him across the chest, sending him sprawling. Eleanor raised the pistol with both hands, fighting to steady her. Aimed despite her trembling arms. The mountain lion turned toward Nathan's fallen form, jaws open in a roar that seemed to shake the very air. She squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out across the marsh, startling a flock of birds into flight from a nearby tree. The mountain lion staggered, a red bloom appearing on its neck where the bullet had found its mark. It swayed on its feet, took one lurching step toward Nathan, then collapsed with a ground-shaking thud. Silence fell, broken only by the distant calls of the startled birds and Eleanor's ragged breathing. She lowered the pistol slowly, unable to believe what had just happened. Nathan pushed himself to his feet, one hand pressed to his bleeding chest. He stared at the fallen cat, then at Eleanor, his expression a mixture of pain and something else. Respect, perhaps, or surprise. "Good shot," he said simply. Eleanor looked down at the pistol in her hands, still warm from discharge. "I didn't think, I just—" She trailed off, suddenly lightheaded. Nathan crossed to her side, examining the mountain lion briefly before kneeling beside her. "You saved my life," he said matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. "We're even then?" Eleanor replied, finding her voice. "Even," he agreed. But as their eyes met over the body of the fallen predator, Eleanor knew that nothing between them would ever be that simple again. Something had changed, a shift as subtle yet profound as the turning of seasons. They had crossed a boundary, invisible but real, and there would be no going back. The mountain lion's massive form lay still, its blood darkening the marsh grass. Nathan knelt beside it, murmuring words in Shawnee that Eleanor couldn't understand. His hand rested briefly on the animal's head in what seemed like a gesture of respect. "We take what mountain spirit offers," he said, rising to his feet with a slight wince. "Meat, fur, claws, nothing wasted." Eleanor nodded, though the prospect of butchering the massive creature made her stomach turn. She had seen animals dressed for cooking before, but never something so large, never so soon after the kill. "Your chest," she said, noticing the way. He held himself stiffly. "It needs tending." Nathan glanced at the wound, where the cat's claws had torn through his shirt and into the flesh beneath. "Small hurt. Cat medicine will help." Before Eleanor could question him further, he drew his knife and began the process of harvesting what they needed from the mountain lion. She watched initially, hesitant, but gradually was drawn in by the methodical precision of his work. He explained each step, which parts were valuable, how they would be used, the purpose of each careful cut. Despite her initial reluctance, Eleanor found herself assisting, following his instructions and learning. The work was messy and difficult, but there was something honest about it, a direct connection to survival that she had never experienced. In her previous life, the sun was beginning its descent by the time they finished taking what they could carry. Nathan wrapped choice cuts of meat in large leaves, along with the cat's gallbladder, which he explained had powerful medicinal properties. The claws he removed with particular care, stringing them on a leather cord. "We cannot stay here," he said, glancing at the sky. "Blood scent travels, attracts other predators." They moved away from the marsh, heading toward a small grove of trees that offered some shelter for the night. The day's exertions had taken their toll on both of them. Eleanor's muscles ached from the unaccustomed labor, and Nathan's injured chest had begun to stiffen noticeably. As they set up camp, Eleanor insisted on examining his wound. "I may not know your medicine," she said firmly, "but I know a wound that needs cleaning when I see one." To her surprise, Nathan acquiesced without argument. He sat on a fallen log and pulled his torn shirt aside to reveal 4 deep gashes across his upper chest. The wounds were clean cuts rather than jagged tears, but deep enough to be concerning. Eleanor heated water in the small pot from Nathan's pack, then used strips torn from her petticoat to bathe the wounds. Nathan sat motionless throughout, only the occasional tightening of his jaw betraying his discomfort. "In Philadelphia," she said, working carefully to avoid causing unnecessary pain, "I assisted at the charity hospital. Mostly I read to patients or brought them water, but I watched. The nurses tend to wounds. You have healer's hands," Nathan observed, gentle but not afraid. The simple compliment warmed something in Eleanor that had been cold since the massacre. "My mother wanted me to be a proper lady, music, embroidery, French conversation, but I was always more interested in practical things." She smiled sadly. It disappointed her terribly. "Why?" Nathan's brow furrowed. "Practical keeps you alive." "In my world, ladies aren't supposed to concern themselves with survival. They're decorative, like porcelain figurines on a mantel." Nathan snorted. "Strange world where women learn useless things." When the wounds were clean, he showed her how to prepare a paste using the mountain lion's gallbladder mixed with herbs from his medicine pouch. The paste had a strong, bitter smell that made Eleanor's nose wrinkle, but Nathan assured her it would prevent the wounds from festering. As night fell, they built a small fire. Nathan cooked strips of mountain lion meat on sticks over the flames, the fat sizzling as it dripped into the fire. The smell made Eleanor's mouth water, reminding her how long it had been since she'd eaten properly. The meat was rich and gamey, unlike anything she had tasted before. Eleanor found herself enjoying it despite her initial misgivings. They ate in companionable silence, the crackle of the fire and distant night sounds of the prairie creating a peaceful backdrop. "Tell me of your mother," Nathan said suddenly. The request caught Eleanor off guard. She set down the bone she had been gnawing, gathering her thoughts. "She was beautiful," she said slowly. "Graceful. Everyone in Lancaster adored her. She played the piano and sang like an angel." Eleanor smiled at the memory. "She was determined that I would be a proper lady, but she was kind about it. Patient with my peculiarities." "Peculiarities?" "I preferred my father's workshop to the parlor, would rather learn how to build a table than embroider a cushion to put on one." Her smile faded. "She died last winter. Fever took her in 3 days. Nathan nodded solemnly. "Quick death. Less suffering." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, though the memory still stung. "My father was lost after that. That's why he decided we should go west. A new sky over our heads," he said. "New earth beneath our feet. He thought it would heal us both. Instead, it brings more sorrow," Nathan said softly. "Yes." She looked up at him. "What about you? Is there someone waiting for you? A wife?" A shadow crossed his face, quickly masked. "There was a woman, Morning Star from Chalagautha village." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. 2 winters ago, sickness came. Many died." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly, recognizing the shared experience of loss that connected them. Nathan shrugged, the gesture seemingly casual, but belied by the tension in his features. "Life continues. Must look forward, not back." His words echoed Eleanor's own thoughts since the massacre. Looking back brought only pain and regret. Looking forward, uncertain as it was, offered at least the possibility of something better. They prepared for sleep, Nathan insisting on taking the first watch. Despite his injury, Eleanor wrapped herself in the blanket he offered, surprised by how quickly exhaustion overtook her. Her last conscious thought was that she should be more afraid, alone in the wilderness with a man from a culture she barely understood. Yet, somehow, she felt safer than she had in days. Eleanor woke to Nathan's hand on her shoulder, his voice low and urgent. "Someone comes. Many horses." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Eleanor sat up quickly, instantly alert. Nathan was already gathering their few belongings, his movements swift and silent despite his injured chest. "The bandits?" she whispered. "No, different." Nathan was moving efficiently, erasing signs of their camp. Soldiers, blue coats, Eleanor's. Heart leaped with a mixture of hope and apprehension. U.S. cavalry meant safety and protection, a return to civilization. For her, for Nathan, they might represent something very different. How many? 6, maybe 8. Coming from the south. He handed her a small pack of provisions. "You go, meet them." Eleanor stared at him in confusion. "What do you mean? White soldiers help white woman, take you to the fort, safety." Understanding dawned slowly. "You want me to leave you?" "Is the best chance. Tell soldiers about bandits. Tell the truth of the massacre." Eleanor felt something rebel within her at the suggestion. After all they had been through together, the idea of simply walking away seemed unthinkable. "And what about you? Where will you go?" "Continue north to my people." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Better this way." "Better for whom?" she demanded, a flare of anger surprising her with its intensity. "I wouldn't be alive without you. I won't just abandon you now." Nathan's gaze finally lifted to meet hers, something unreadable in their dark depths. "Soldiers see a Shawnee man with white woman. Ask no questions, shoot first." The harsh reality of his words struck Eleanor like a physical blow. He was right, of course. The soldiers would likely assume the worst, that he had captured her, perhaps harmed her. In their eyes, a savage with a white woman could only mean one thing. "Then we'll avoid them," she said firmly. "Continue your camp together." Nathan studied her face for a moment, searching for something. Doubt, perhaps, or fear. Finding none, he gave a single nod. "Path more dangerous now. Soldiers patrol. The borders of Shawnee land? I understand." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Decision made. "I'm not afraid." A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. "No, not afraid." He slung his pack over his good shoulder. "Come. We go before light grows stronger." They slipped away from their campsite as the sounds of the approaching patrol grew. Clearer. Horses' hooves, the jingle of tack, male voices calling commands. Instead of heading directly north as they had planned, Nathan led them west, using a line of hills to screen their movement from distant observers. As the sun rose fully, Eleanor glanced back once at the dust cloud that marked the soldiers' passage, her last connection to the world she had known slipping away behind her. The sight should have filled her with regret or longing, but instead she felt only certainty. Her path lay forward, not back. Whatever awaited her in Nathan's world, she would face it with the same courage that had kept her alive thus far. She turned away from the soldiers and followed Nathan into the unknown, her decision made. The day grew warmer as they traveled, the sun climbing high in a cloudless sky. Nathan led them through increasingly rugged terrain, a landscape of sharp ridges and hidden valleys that seemed designed to confuse and mislead. He moved with the confidence of someone returning to familiar ground, occasionally pausing to study. Landmarks visible only to his experienced eye. Eleanor followed as best she could, noting with surprise that her body was adapting to the demands of their journey. The aches in her muscles had transformed from sharp pain to a dull, persistent throb that she could push aside with sufficient determination. Her city-bred softness was being steadily replaced by a newfound resilience. By midday, they had put considerable distance between themselves and the cavalry patrol. Nathan finally slowed their pace, allowing a brief rest beside a small creek that bubbled up between moss-covered rocks. "We make good time," he observed, filling their water skins. "Reach my people's summer camp by tomorrow, if there is no more trouble." Eleanor knelt beside him, splashing cool water on her face. "Will your people welcome me?" Nathan's expression turned thoughtful. "Some, yes. Some, no." He met her gaze directly. Chief Blackfish is a wise man, but cautious with white settlers. "Too many broken promises. I'm hardly a settler now," Eleanor said with a wry smile. "Truth," he nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "But still prepare for a difficult welcome. Stay close to me." They continued their journey, angling northeast through a series of narrow passes that gradually opened into a broader valley. The vegetation changed subtly, more pine and spruce appearing among the oaks, the grass growing shorter and more sparse on the rocky slopes. As they walked, Nathan began pointing out features of the landscape that would have escaped Eleanor's notice. The nearly invisible game trail they followed, plants that could be eaten or used for medicine, signs of animals that had passed recently. "There," he said, indicating a patch of disturbed earth beneath an overhanging ledge. "Fox den. Good sign." "Why is that good?" Eleanor asked, seeing nothing remarkable about the burrow. "Fox chooses safe places, where food, water close, where larger predators do not hunt." He tapped his temple. "Fox smart. We learn from Fox." Eleanor found herself absorbing these lessons eagerly, filing away knowledge that would have seemed irrelevant in her previous life, but now might mean the difference between survival and death. There was a strange freedom in this new existence, stripped of social conventions and expectations, reduced to the essential business of staying alive. Late in the afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Nathan suddenly raised his hand, signaling for Eleanor to stop. He dropped into a crouch, motioning for her to do the same. "What is it?" she whispered, scanning the landscape ahead but seeing nothing unusual. Nathan pointed to a distant rise where a single figure on horseback was silhouetted against the sky. "Watcher." Eleanor squinted against the sun's glare. "One of your people?" "Yes, scout who watches the borders of our hunting grounds." Nathan studied the distant figure. "He sees us already." As if in confirmation, the scout raised a hand in a deliberate gesture. Nathan stood slowly and returned the signal, adding a second motion that Eleanor couldn't interpret. "Now he knows I return with a stranger," Nathan explained. "He will ride to camp, bring news." "Is that good or bad?" Eleanor asked, rising to stand beside him. "Depends on news already in camp." A shadow crossed Nathan's face. "Last moon, tensions with white settlers grew worse. More trouble since I left." He didn't need to finish the thought. Eleanor understood the precarious position she might be in, a white woman, arriving in a Shawnee camp during a time of conflict between their peoples. The scout wheeled his horse and disappeared over the rise, riding hard toward the north. Nathan watched him go, then turned to Eleanor with an uncharacteristically grave expression. "Listen carefully," he said. "When we reach camp, some may speak harsh words, show anger. Do not react. Do not show fear." His eyes held hers with urgent intensity. "I give protection, but you must be strong yourself." Eleanor nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "I understand." "Good." He reached into his medicine pouch and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather. Unwrapping it, he revealed a carved stone. A fox, small enough to fit in her palm, polished to a dull sheen by years of handling. "My uncle made this," Nathan said, pressing it into her hand. "Protection spirit. Mountain cat you killed gives strength. This gives—" He searched for the word. Belonging. Eleanor closed her fingers around the small carving, deeply moved by the gesture. "I can't take this. It was your uncle's." "Now it's yours," he said firmly. "Keep close. When afraid, remember that a mountain cat fell by your hand. You earned a place." The weight of the small stone in her palm felt somehow significant, a tangible connection to Nathan's world, a talisman against the unknown challenges ahead. She slipped it into the pocket of her dress, feeling its reassuring solidity against her hip. They continued their journey as the shadows lengthened across the valley. Eleanor noticed Nathan becoming increasingly alert, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. Once he paused abruptly, head cocked as if listening, though she heard nothing unusual. "Someone follows," he said quietly, hand moving to his. "Knife?" Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine despite the afternoon warmth. "The bandits?" "No, different." He studied the trail behind them, eyes narrowed. One person, moving quiet, skilled. Another scout, maybe? His expression remained troubled. "Or someone who tracks both of us." They resumed walking, but now Nathan adjusted their path, leading them through areas of rocky ground where tracks would be difficult to leave. He set a quick pace that had Eleanor struggling to keep up, her newly developed stamina tested by the rough terrain and increasing elevation. The sun was beginning to set when they entered a dense stand of pines. The sudden dimness beneath the canopy was disorienting after hours in open country. Eleanor stayed close to Nathan, fighting the impression that eyes watched from the shadowed spaces between trees. Without warning, Nathan stopped. Eleanor nearly collided with his back, catching herself just in time. She peered around him to see what had caused the abrupt halt. 3 Shawnee warriors stood blocking their path, bows drawn and arrows pointed directly at them. Their faces were painted with red and black streaks, their expressions impassive and unwelcoming. One of them, the center figure taller than the others, spoke sharply in Shawnee. Nathan responded calmly in the same language, his hands held slightly away from his weapons in a non-threatening gesture. The exchange continued for several tense moments, voices low but intensity clear even to Eleanor, who couldn't understand the words. Finally, the tall warrior lowered his bow slightly, though his companions maintained their aim. He switched to heavily accented English, directing his words at Eleanor. "Why did you come here, white woman?" Eleanor stepped forward, grateful that her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "I survived a massacre. Nathan saved my life." The warrior's eyes narrowed. "Massacre by who?" "White men, bandits who attack both your people and mine, then blame Indians for their crimes." A flicker of surprise crossed the warrior's face before his expression hardened again. "You witnessed this?" "Yes," Eleanor said firmly. "I saw everything. I can testify to the truth." The 3 warriors exchanged glances. The tall one spoke again to Nathan, who nodded and replied. After another moment of consideration, the warrior gestured for his companions to lower their weapons. "Chief must hear this," he said. "You come." But his gaze fixed on Eleanor with unmistakable warning. "You walk with blind eyes." Nathan turned to Eleanor, his expression conveying the seriousness of the situation. "They fear you will learn path to the village for protection." "I understand," Eleanor said, though the prospect of being blindfolded in this unfamiliar wilderness sent a surge of anxiety through her. The tall warrior produced a strip of woven cloth. Nathan took it from him and approached Eleanor. "Trust me," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "No harm comes while I guide." Eleanor nodded, closing her eyes as he placed the cloth over them, tying it securely at the back of her head. The sudden darkness was disorienting, heightening her other senses. The scent of pine, the sound of wind through branches, the murmur of voices in a language she couldn't understand. She felt Nathan's hand close around hers, his grip firm and reassuring. "I lead, step where I step." They began to move forward, Eleanor placing her trust entirely in Nathan's guidance. It was perhaps the most vulnerable she had been since the massacre, unable to see, surrounded by those who might wish her harm, in territory utterly unknown to her. Yet strangely, as they journeyed deeper into Shawnee land, she felt something unexpected beginning to take root within her. Not fear, though that was certainly present, something else. A sense that every step carried her further from the woman she had been and closer to someone new, someone stronger, someone who might, against all odds, find a place in this harsh, new world. The carved fox pressed against her hip with each step, a reminder of Nathan's words, "You earned a place." She hoped, as they led her blindfolded toward the unknown, that it would prove true. The journey through darkness seemed endless. Eleanor concentrated on the pressure of Nathan's hand guiding her, the sound of his voice occasionally murmuring instructions. "Step high here. Duck branches. Under careful stones." The only constants in her blindfolded world. The voices of the warriors surrounded her, their Shawnee language flowing like water over rocks, sometimes sharp with what sounded like disagreement, other times low and urgent. When they finally stopped, she could sense a change in the air. Smoke from cooking fires, the distant sound of voices and movement, the barking of dogs. They had reached the Shawnee camp. "Ready?" Nathan asked quietly near her ear. Eleanor nodded, her throat too dry for words. The blindfold was removed, and she blinked against the fading evening light, taking in her surroundings. The Shawnee summer camp spread before her in a sheltered valley, perhaps 25 lodges arranged in a rough circle, some constructed of hides stretched over wooden frames, others more permanent structures of bark and wood. Cook fires flickered throughout the camp, sending thin columns of smoke into the darkening sky. Children paused in their play to stare at the newcomers. Women stood from their work with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Men approached with hands resting on weapons. Nathan stood tall beside her, his face composed but alert. The tall warrior who had confronted them in the forest moved ahead, calling out to the gathering crowd. A ripple of reaction passed through the assembly. Surprise, anger, suspicion. A path cleared through the people as an elderly man emerged from the largest lodge at the center of the camp. His face was deeply lined with age, his long gray hair bound with a single eagle feather. Despite his years, he moved with the straight-back dignity of one accustomed to authority. "Chief Blackfish," Nathan said under his breath, "show respect. Do not speak until spoken to." The chief approached slowly, his dark eyes taking in every detail of Eleanor's appearance. The torn and stained dress, the tangled hair, the mixture of fear and determination in her stance. He spoke in Shawnee to Nathan, who responded at length, occasionally gesturing toward Eleanor or in the direction from which they had traveled. Eleanor stood silently, acutely aware of the stares from all sides. Children whispered behind their hands, nudged by mothers into silence. Young warriors watched with undisguised suspicion. A few of the older women studied her with expressions that seemed more calculating than hostile. Finally, Chief Blackfish turned his attention fully to Eleanor, addressing her in halting but understandable English. "Swift Hawk says you survive. When all others die, says you witness the truth of who kills your people." "Yes," Eleanor replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I saw everything. It was white men, bandits pretending to be Indians. They've been raiding both settler wagons and native villages, stirring hatred between our peoples." The chief's weathered face remained impassive. "Why should we believe white woman's words? White tongues often speak lies about Shawnee." Eleanor felt the weight of every eye upon her. This moment, her response, would determine not just her welcome, but possibly her survival. Her fingers found the carved fox in her pocket, drawing strength from its solidity. "I have no reason to lie," she said. "I've lost everything, my father, my possessions, my future in Ohio. The men who destroyed all that are still out there, free to continue their crimes against both our peoples." She met the chief's gaze directly. "The truth is all I have left to offer." Blackfish studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and spoke at length to a small group of older men who had gathered behind him, council members, Eleanor guessed, by their attentive posture and the respect shown to them by others. One of them, a man with a deeply scarred face and only one eye, spoke forcefully, gesturing toward Eleanor with obvious disapproval. Another, wearing an elaborate necklace of mountain lion claws, seemed to argue in her favor, pointing to Nathan's bandaged chest. The debate continued as darkness fell completely over the camp. More torches were lit, casting flickering shadows across the gathered faces. Eleanor stood motionless beside Nathan, determined not to show the exhaustion and fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Finally, Chief Blackfish raised his hand, silencing the council's discussion. He turned back to Eleanor and Nathan. "Woman, we'll stay," he announced. 3 days. Council hears the full story tomorrow when sun high." He pointed to a small lodge at the edge of the camp. "Stay there, watched always." With that, he turned and walked back toward the central lodge, the council members following behind him. The crowd began to disperse, though many continued to cast curious or hostile glances toward Eleanor. "Good outcome," Nathan said quietly, as they began walking toward the designated lodge. "Better than expected." "Being watched at all times is good," Eleanor whispered back. "Not killing immediately is good," Nathan replied with unexpected frankness. "Rest now, we talk more later." The small lodge was sparsely furnished. 2 sleeping pallets of pine boughs covered with buffalo robes, a central fire pit, and a few clay vessels for water. A young woman entered shortly after them, silently placing a wooden bowl of stew and a water skin near the fire before departing without meeting Eleanor's eyes. "Who was that?" Eleanor asked, sinking gratefully onto one of the pallets as her legs finally gave way beneath her. "Willow, my cousin's daughter." Nathan sat across from her, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injured chest. "She is curious about you." She didn't look at me. Shawnee way. Watch without seeming to watch. A hint of amusement touched his expression. "Women in my family see everything." Eleanor managed a tired smile at that. "Women everywhere see everything. Men just don't notice us doing it." This drew a small chuckle from Nathan, a sound Eleanor realized she had never heard from him before. The brief moment of lightness felt precious amid the tension of their situation. They ate the stew, a rich mixture of venison, wild onions, and unfamiliar roots, in companionable silence. Eleanor found herself studying the interior of the lodge, noting the craftsmanship of the structure, the practical arrangement of the sparse belongings. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked finally. "Council meets. You tell story, full story, every detail. They decide if truth or lie. And if they decide I'm lying." Nathan didn't answer immediately. "Sleep," he said instead. "Need strength for tomorrow." Eleanor lay down on the buffalo robe, its musky scent oddly comforting after days in the wilderness. Exhaustion pulled at her, but her mind raced with anxiety about the coming day. Her testimony before the council would determine not just her fate, but potentially the future relationship between the Shawnee and nearby settlers. "Nathan," she said softly into the darkness, "thank you for bringing me here, for trusting me." There was a long pause before he replied. "You trusted first, following Shawnee warriors into unknown land." "I had no choice. Always choice. Could have gone to soldiers. Choose the safety of your own people." Eleanor considered this. He was right. Of course, She had made a choice when she decided to continue with him rather than seek out the cavalry patrol, a choice that had led her here, to this lodge, to tomorrow's testimony. "Get sleep," Nathan said, his voice already heavy with approaching slumber. "Tomorrow comes soon." Despite her anxiety, Eleanor found herself drifting off, lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of the Shawnee camp. Distant voices, the occasional laugh or cry of a child, dogs barking at something in the night. Different from the sounds of Philadelphia, different from the wagon train, yet somehow containing the same essential human elements. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was a strange one, that perhaps the distance between her world and Nathan's was not as vast as she had once believed. Morning arrived with a soft touch on her shoulder. Eleanor opened her eyes to find a young woman, Willow, Nathan's cousin's daughter, kneeling beside her pallet. The girl's dark eyes were serious but not unfriendly as she offered a small wooden cup of steaming liquid. "Drink," she said. Her English surprisingly clear. "Give strength for counsel." Eleanor sat up, accepting the cup with murmured thanks. The tea was bitter but invigorating, clearing the fog of sleep from her mind. She glanced around the lodge to find that Nathan was already gone. "Where is?" she began. "Swifthawk speaks with elders," Willow answered, setting out a clean dress, simple in design but carefully made from soft buckskin. "You wear this. Your dress?" She gestured at Eleanor's torn and stained clothing with a slight grimace. Eleanor hesitated, touched by the unexpected kindness but uncertain about adopting Shawnee dress before the council. Would it seem presumptuous, an attempt to curry favor? Willow seemed to read her thoughts. "Council respects clean appearance, shows respect back." She pointed to Eleanor's matted hair. "I help with this too." Recognizing the wisdom in the young woman's advice, Eleanor accepted the dress and allowed Willow to help her wash and comb her tangled hair into a simple braid. The transformation was remarkable. The buckskin dress fit surprisingly well, and the simple act of being clean again restored something of her dignity. "Thank you," Eleanor said when they had finished. "This is very kind." Willow shrugged, but a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Swifthawk says you are a brave woman. Shot a mountain cat to save him." She touched the claw necklace she wore. "Cat spirit is strong in you now." Before Eleanor could respond, the hide covering the lodge entrance was pulled aside. A stern-faced warrior, one of those who had escorted them to the camp the previous evening, gestured for her to follow. "Council waits," he said gruffly. With a deep breath and a final grateful nod to Willow, Eleanor stepped out to face whatever judgment awaited her. The council lodge stood at the center of the camp, larger than the others, and marked with totemic symbols painted on its exterior. As Eleanor approached, flanked by her stern warrior escort, she could see that a significant gathering had already assembled inside. The morning sunlight filtered through the smoke hole at the top, casting dappled patterns across the assembled. Faces. Chief Blackfish sat at the head of the circle, his weathered face impassive. To his right was the scarred elder who had argued against her the previous evening, his single eye regarding her with undisguised suspicion. To his left, the man with the mountain lion claw necklace, the one who had spoken in her favor, nodded slightly. As she entered, Nathan stood to one side, his posture formal, face carefully neutral. He did not acknowledge her directly, but his presence provided a measure of reassurance. "Come forward," Chief Blackfish instructed, gesturing to the center of the circle. "Sit here." Eleanor took her place on the woven mat indicated, conscious of the many eyes upon her. Women of the tribe had gathered at the periphery of the lodge, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Among them, she spotted Willow, who offered an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "You claim to witness an attack on a wagon train," Blackfish began without preamble. "Tell us what you saw. Every detail from the beginning." Eleanor took a deep breath, centering herself. This was perhaps the most important story she would ever tell. Lives, both Shawnee and settler, might depend on her ability to convey the truth convincingly. "We were part of the Thompson wagon train," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "bound for Fort Hamilton in the Ohio Territory. 23 people, families mostly, the Parkers, the Wilsons, the Caldwells. My father, Jeremiah Blackwood, and I joined in Pennsylvania." She described the journey, 8 weeks on the trail, the crossing of the Ohio River, the gradual shift in landscape as they entered the rich valley lands. "3 mornings ago, just before dawn, I went to gather water from a stream near our camp," Eleanor continued, forcing herself to relive the terrible moments she'd been trying to forget. "We had camped in a small valley, bordered by sycamores. I was maybe 100 yards from the nearest wagon when I heard the first shots." Her voice remained steady as she recounted the horror of what followed, hiding in the tall grass, watching as the attackers systematically murdered the members of the wagon train. She described the men in detail, their clothing, their weapons, the way they moved and spoke. They were white men, she emphasized. Some wore pieces of native dress, feathers, beaded strips, but it was obviously false, a disguise. They spoke English to each other and used white men's curses. The one-eyed elder leaned forward. "How do you survive when all others die?" "I was already away from camp when the attack began," Eleanor explained. "I hid in the grass, then under an overturned wagon. They were careless, confident no one had escaped, more interested in looting than searching thoroughly." She described her days alone, the desperate flight through unfamiliar territory. Finally, encountering the same men at their camp. "I heard them talking," she said, meeting the chief's gaze directly. "They spoke of the good haul from the wagons. One said they should have kept some of the women. Another said, 'Next time we won't be so hasty.' They were the same men who attacked us, not Indians as they wanted it to appear." The council members exchanged glances. The man with the mountain lion claw necklace spoke in Shawnee to Blackfish, who nodded thoughtfully before turning back to Eleanor. "These men, you know who they are?" Eleanor shook her head. "I never saw them before the attack, but they seemed familiar with the territory. They mentioned a trading post to the east where they could sell the stolen goods. Wilson's outpost, I think they called it." "Wilson," Nathan interjected, speaking for the first time. Several heads turned toward him. "Only Trading Post 3. Day's ride east, known to deal with stolen goods." Blackfish's expression darkened. "Wilson man has brought much trouble. Buys furs from Shawnee land. Claims we steal from white trappers." The one-eyed elder, Running Bear, Eleanor had heard others call him, spoke rapidly in Shawnee, gesturing emphatically. Though Eleanor couldn't understand his words, the meaning was clear. He remained unconvinced, suspicious of her account. "Running Bear asks why we should believe you," Blackfish translated. "Says white woman would say anything to save herself." Eleanor felt a surge of frustration, but kept her voice measured. "What reason would I have to lie? If I wanted to blame your people for the massacre, I would have gone to the soldiers we saw. Yesterday, I would not be here alone among you, telling a story that places blame on my own kind." This caused a murmur among the gathered council. The logic of her argument was difficult to refute. "There is more," Nathan said, stepping forward slightly. "Woman could have joined soldiers. Choose to continue with me instead. Choose truth over the easy path." Running Bear spoke again, his tone challenging. Nathan responded with equal intensity, and soon multiple voices joined the debate, the Shawnee language flowing too rapidly for Eleanor to follow any of it. Blackfish raised his hand, silencing the council. "One more question," he said to Eleanor. "These men who attack, how many?" "I saw 5 clearly," she replied. "There may have been more. Their leader was a tall man with a beard split by a scar across his chin. Dark hair. He wore a brown hat with a turkey feather, called himself Malone." A shocked silence fell over the council. Eleanor looked up to find every face staring at her with new intensity. "You know him," she said slowly, recognizing the reaction. "Who is he?" Blackfish exchanged glances with the other elders before answering. "Man you describe is Jacob Malone, once an army scout now." He searched for the English word, outlaw. He led attack on the Shawnee hunting party 1 moon ago. Killed many, including my brother's son. My cousin, Nathan added quietly. His son, too. Eleanor turned to him, understanding dawning. This was why he had been tracking the bandits, why he had been so quick to help her. Their paths had converged through shared tragedy. "Malone claims Shawnee attacked settlers," Blackfish continued. "Army believes, sends soldiers, threatens war if raids continue." "But it's not your people raiding," Eleanor said, anger kindling within her. "It's Malone and his men, creating conflict for their own profit." "Yes," the chief confirmed grimly. "But who believes Shawnee word against white man's? Even with a peace treaty, white soldiers are quick to blame, slow to listen." The elder with the mountain lion claw necklace, Stone Spirit, Eleanor heard someone call him, spoke at length, his tone measured but forceful. Others joined in, the debate resuming with new urgency. Eleanor watched their faces, wishing she could understand their words, but reading much in their expressions and gestures. Finally, Blackfish called for silence once more. He studied Eleanor thoughtfully before speaking. "Council believes your words. Carry truth," he announced. "Story. It fits with what we know of Malone. What we do not know is what to do with you now." Eleanor hadn't considered this question. In focusing on convincing the council of the truth, she hadn't thought beyond that immediate goal. "I want justice," she said firmly. "For my father, for the others who died, for your people who have been blamed for Malone's crimes." "Justice is hard to find on the frontier," Blackfish replied. "White law does not listen to Shawnee, and white woman who lives with Shawnee." He shook his head. "White law does not listen to her either." The truth of this statement settled heavily in the lodge. Eleanor was caught between worlds, no longer fully part of white settler society, not truly accepted among the Shawnee. Her testimony would be dismissed or discredited in both courts. There must be a way, she insisted, someone who would listen, who would have the authority to investigate Malone's gang. Nathan, who had been silent during the latter part of the council, stepped forward. "There is one. Colonel William Richardson at Fort Hamilton, man of honor, has worked for fair treatment of both peoples." Several council members nodded in recognition. Of the name, even Running Bear, the suspicious one-eyed elder, grunted what sounded like grudging agreement. "Richardson knows Shawnee speaks the truth," Blackfish confirmed, "but Fort Hamilton is a 4 days' journey, dangerous path." "I'll go," Eleanor said without hesitation. "I'll testify to what I saw." Her declaration caused another stir among the council. Nathan's expression remained guarded, but something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or concern. Possibly both. Blackfish conferred briefly with the other elders before turning back to Eleanor. "Council will consider this path. Until a decision is made, you stay in camp. Learn our ways." His gaze was penetrating. "Show if you truly stand. For truth or only for your own survival." With that, the council session ended. The elders rose, filing out of the lodge with measured dignity. The women followed, many casting curious glances at Eleanor as they departed. Nathan approached her as the lodge emptied. "You did well," he said quietly. "Council rarely believes in an outsider so quickly." "What happens now?" Eleanor asked, suddenly, exhausted by the emotional strain of reliving the massacre. "Now we wait. Council debates, decides." He offered his hand to help her rise from the mat. "And you learn what it means to live among Shawnee." As they stepped outside into the bright midday sun, Eleanor realized that a new chapter of her journey was beginning. The testimony was over, but the greater challenge, finding her place in this unfamiliar world, was just beginning. The days that followed Eleanor's testimony unfolded in a rhythm entirely foreign to her previous life. While the council deliberated on the matter of Fort Hamilton, she found herself immersed in the daily patterns of Shawnee existence, not as a guest or observer, but as a participant. Willow became her guide and reluctant teacher, showing Eleanor how to perform the tasks expected of Shawnee women. The chief's decision that she should learn their ways was being taken quite literally by the tribe. "You hold wrong," Willow chided, adjusting Eleanor's grip on the bone scraper she was using to prepare a deerskin. "Like this. Firm but gentle. Too hard damage hide, too soft leaves flesh." Eleanor repositioned her hands, feeling the blisters, forming despite the calluses she had developed during her days in the wilderness. The work was physically demanding in ways she had never experienced. The constant bending, the repetitive motions, the precision required even when muscles trembled with fatigue. "In Philadelphia," she said between strokes, "I had servants who did the cooking and cleaning. I spent my mornings practicing piano or needlework." Willow looked puzzled. "Piano?" Eleanor tried to explain the instrument, mimicking the motion of playing keys. Willow laughed. "Sounds like a man's toy, not useful." She gestured at the half-scraped hide. "This keeps the family warm in winter. What does piano do?" The question gave Eleanor pause. What, indeed? So many of the accomplishments she had been raised to value seemed absurdly impractical in this new context. As the afternoon sun beat down, a group of children ran past, shouting and laughing in a game of chase. One small boy, perhaps 5 years old, stumbled and fell heavily, scraping his knee on a stone. Instead of crying, he pushed himself up, brushed off the dirt, and rejoined the game with barely a wince. "Shawnee children learn early," Willow commented, following Eleanor's gaze. "Pain is teacher, weakness not honored." "In my world, mothers rush to comfort crying children," Eleanor said. "We protect them from pain when we can." Willow's expression turned thoughtful. "Different ways. Not wrong. Just different. Here children must be strong to survive." She returned to her work. "Like you must be strong now." The observation struck Eleanor more deeply than Willow likely intended. Strength in this world was measured differently, not by social graces or marriage prospects, but by one's ability to endure, to contribute, to survive. By midday, they joined the other women at the cooking fires. Eleanor's hands were raw, her back aching, but she felt a strange sense of accomplishment in the properly prepared hide, in the skills, however rudimentary, she was beginning to acquire. Some of the women still regarded her with suspicion, keeping their distance and speaking Shawnee when she was near, clearly discussing her. Others had begun to accept her presence with grudging tolerance, occasionally correcting her technique or offering small nods of approval when she managed a task correctly. One elderly woman, White Dove, had taken a particular interest in Eleanor, though she spoke no English. She communicated through gestures and expressions, showing Eleanor which plants could be eaten, which had medicinal properties, which were to be avoided. "She lost daughter to white man's sickness," Willow explained when Eleanor asked about the old woman's attention. "Maybe you sent her knowledge before she joins ancestors." The responsibility of this unexpected mentorship weighed on Eleanor. These were not simple cooking tips or housekeeping skills being shared. They were survival knowledge accumulated over generations, sacred in their way. Throughout these days of learning, Nathan remained a distant figure. She caught glimpses of him in council meetings, training with younger warriors, and departing on hunting expeditions. When their paths did cross, He acknowledged her with a nod or brief greeting, but the easy companionship of their journey seemed to have evaporated within the confines of the camp. The evening of her fourth day among the Shawnee, Eleanor sat alone, outside her lodging, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The small carved fox rested in her palm, its smooth surface warmed by her touch. "Fox spirit speaks to you." Nathan's voice came from behind her, surprising Eleanor with its suddenness. He moved silently. "Even in camp, I don't know about spirits," she admitted, as he sat beside her on the fallen log. "But it reminds me that I'm stronger than I once believed." Nathan nodded, his gaze on the horizon. "Council finishes discussion tomorrow. Decision comes about Fort Hamilton." Eleanor's heart quickened. "Have they given any indication of their thinking?" "Divided. Some say the risk too great. Malone's men watched trails. Army patrols suspicious of Shawnee." He glanced at her. "Others say truth must be told, no matter the danger." "I still wish to go," she said without hesitation. "For justice, for your cousin's family, for mine." A moment of silence stretched between them, comfortable in a way their recent interactions had not been. "Why have you been avoiding me?" Eleanor asked finally, the question that had been troubling her for days. Nathan's expression remained carefully neutral. "Not avoiding, giving space. Here you are, white woman in Shawnee camp. Different from woman alone in the wilderness." He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Some watch how I treat you. Judge both of us by this." Understanding dawned slowly. Their closeness on the journey, born of necessity and shared danger, carried different implications within. The social structure of the camp, Nathan's position, his respect among his people, could be compromised by appearing too attached to an outsider. "I see," Eleanor said softly. "I wouldn't want to cause problems for you here." "Not a problem," Nathan corrected. "Complication. Different." Their conversation was interrupted by commotion at the camp's edge. Warriors were gathering, weapons in hand, responding to something beyond Eleanor's view. Nathan rose immediately. "Alert and tense. Stay here," he instructed, already moving toward the disturbance. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before following at a discreet distance. Whatever was happening might affect her as well, and she was tired of being sheltered from difficult truths. At the camp's perimeter, a small group of warriors surrounded a kneeling figure, a white man, bloodied and bound, his face a mass of bruises. Chief Blackfish stood before him, expression grave, as Running Bear reported something in rapid Shawnee. "Found near Creek Bend," Nathan translated quietly for Eleanor, who had come to stand beside him despite his instructions. "Watching camp. When caught, try to fight." The captive raised his head, revealing a face that made Eleanor gasp with recognition. Despite the injuries, she knew him, one of Malone's men, the youngest of the bandits she had glimpsed at their camp. Blackfish turned at her reaction. "You know this man?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, stepping forward. "He was with the bandits. One of Malone's gang." A ripple of tension passed through the gathered Shawnee. The captive's eyes widened as he recognized Eleanor. "You're supposed to be dead," he rasped, disbelief evident beneath his fear. "You died in the wagons with the rest." "Clearly not," Eleanor replied coldly. "Unlike my father, unlike the children. Your gang murdered." Blackfish addressed the captive in halting English. "Why you watch our camp?" The young bandit's gaze darted between the armed warriors surrounding him. "Malone sent me," he said, desperation loosening his tongue. "Said to find the Indian who's been picking us off, the one who took Benning with an arrow, and to look for any survivors from the wagon train." "How did Malone know to look here?" Nathan demanded. "Army patrol," the captive replied. "They reported seeing a white woman with an Indian brave heading north. Malone figured it had to be the one that got away." Eleanor felt a chill run through her. Malone knew she had survived, knew she was a witness to his crimes. and now knew exactly where to find her. Blackfish spoke rapidly to the council members who had joined the gathering. The debate was brief but intense, concluding with a sharp nod from the chief. "Take him to the council lodge," he ordered. "We learn what else he knows." As the warriors hauled the captive away, Blackfish turned to Eleanor and Nathan. "This changes. Path ahead. Malone now hunts both of you, knows you can tell the truth of his crimes. All the more reason to reach Fort Hamilton," Eleanor argued, "before he silences us permanently." Blackfish studied her with newfound respect. "You have the courage of a Shawnee woman, even in white skin." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Council meets now, not tomorrow. Decision cannot wait with the enemy so close." The chief strode toward the council lodge, calling for the elders to join him. Nathan moved to follow, then paused, turning back to Eleanor. "Stay in your lodge," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument this time. "Warriors posted outside. I will return when the council finishes." Eleanor wanted to protest, but recognized the genuine concern in his eyes. This was not about keeping her away from tribal matters, but about protecting her from very real danger. She nodded her agreement and headed back to her small dwelling, her decision about Fort Hamilton now carrying even greater urgency. The council's deliberations lasted well into the night. Eleanor sat in her lodge, listening to the muffled sounds of the camp, hushed conversations outside, the occasional bark of a dog, the soft lullaby a mother sang to quiet her child. Despite the ordinary nature of these sounds, there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been present before. The capture of Malone's scout had changed everything. Two young warriors stood guard outside her dwelling, their silhouettes occasionally visible against the hide walls when they moved. Their presence was both reassuring and unsettling. Protection, yes, but also a reminder of the danger that had followed her to this place. Willow had departed after arranging protective fetishes at the lodge entrance, small bundles of herbs and feathers that she explained would ward off evil. Whether they worked or not, the gesture was touching. "Swifthawk will protect you," Willow had said with absolute certainty. "He has seen your spirit," Eleanor had looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Willow seemed surprised by the question. "You do not know. In our ways, when a person saves another from death, spirits are joined. When you killed a mountain cat that would take his life, your spirit spoke to his." She fingered the claw at her neck. "This is powerful medicine between warriors." The implications of this cultural belief settled over Eleanor like a blanket, both comforting and weighty with responsibility. In Nathan's worldview, they were connected not just by circumstance or mutual aid, but by something deeper, something spiritual. It was well past midnight when the hide covering her lodge entrance was pushed aside. Nathan ducked inside, his expression grave in the dim light of the small fire. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. "Council has decided," he said without preamble, settling cross-legged before the fire. Eleanor sat up straighter, heart quickening. "What will happen?" "Many things." Nathan added a small stick to the fire, watching the flames catch. "Camp moves. At dawn, deeper into Shawnee territory, harder to find. Women, children, and elders go north to summer hunting grounds by the Great Lakes." "And us?" Eleanor asked, noting his phrasing. Nathan met her gaze directly. "We go to Fort Hamilton. You, me, 4 warriors. Try to reach Colonel Richardson before Malone finds us." Relief and anxiety washed through Eleanor in equal measure. The council had agreed to her plan, but the journey would be perilous, with Malone actively hunting them. What about the bandit, the one who was caught? A shadow crossed Nathan's face. He gave information, names of others in Malone's gang, location of their camp, plans to blame the next raid on Pika tribe to the south. He paused. He will not return to Malone. Eleanor didn't press for details, understanding the implication. The young bandit had Met tribal justice for his crimes against the Shawnee people. When do we leave? Before dawn. Secret path. Need to travel light. Fast. Nathan produced a small bundle from his pack. Brought these for my journey. He unwrapped the bundle to reveal moccasins made of soft deer hide, decorated with subtle beadwork. Willow made for you, better than boots for quiet travel. Eleanor accepted the gift, touched by the young woman's thoughtfulness. Please thank her for me. Thank yourself. She says, you learn well for white woman. A hint of amusement flickered in Nathan's eyes. High praise from Shawnee girl. They spent the next hour preparing for the journey, packing only essential supplies, reviewing the route they would take, discussing contingencies if they encountered trouble. It was a grim but necessary conversation, both of them acutely aware of the stakes. Rest now, Nathan said finally. Need strength for days ahead. Eleanor nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily with her mind racing. As Nathan rose, to leave, she called after him. What did the council learn about Malone's whereabouts? How close is he? Nathan hesitated, clearly debating whether to share this information. One day's ride southwest, camp near a trading post called Wilson's. Outpost. So close, Eleanor whispered, a chill running through her despite the fire's warmth. Yes, why do we leave different directions? Use Shawnee paths through hills. He studied her face. Are you afraid? It would have been easy to lie, to pretend bravery she didn't entirely feel, but Eleanor had learned that honesty between them was more valuable than pride. Yes, she admitted, but not enough to turn back. Fear is useful only if it makes you act. Remember? Nathan nodded, recognition flickering in his eyes at her reference to her father's teaching. Good fear makes feet quick, eyes sharp. Bad fear makes your heart freeze. He adjusted his pack. Your fear is good. With that assessment, he departed, leaving Eleanor to prepare herself for what might be the most dangerous journey of her life. Sleep came fitfully, dreams filled with pursuing, shadows and the echoing sound of gunfire. Eleanor woke before the designated hour, her body tense with anticipation. Outside, the camp was stirring with quiet purpose. Families preparing for their own journey north, warriors readying weapons and horses. The 4 warriors who would accompany them to Fort Hamilton were already gathered at the edge of the clearing when Eleanor arrived. Stone Spirit, the elder with the mountain lion claw necklace. Swift Elk, a middle-aged warrior known for his tracking skills. Wolf Brother, younger than the others, but renowned for his endurance. And to Eleanor's surprise, Running Bear, the one-eyed elder who had been most skeptical of her testimony. Running Bear comes, she asked Nathan quietly as she approached. His choice, Nathan replied. Old eyes see truth others miss. Good tracker before injury. Chief Blackfish appeared as they prepared to depart, his weathered face solemn in the early light. He spoke briefly to each warrior in Shawnee, clasping their forearms in a gesture of respect and farewell. When he came to Eleanor, he switched to English. You carry Shawnee truth now, he said gravely. Heavy burden for any shoulders, heavier for woman alone between worlds. I'm not alone, Eleanor replied, glancing at Nathan and the others. Blackfish nodded, approval warming his dark eyes. No, not alone. He pressed something into her hand, a small carved token bearing symbols she didn't recognize. Show this to Richardson. He knows Blackfish's mark. Now go. Speak with a straight tongue. With these final words of guidance, the chief stepped back, raising his hand in a gesture of blessing or farewell, perhaps both. The small party mounted their horses, Eleanor somewhat awkwardly, as she was still adapting to riding bareback, in the Shawnee fashion. As they rode away from the camp, Eleanor glanced back once at the community that had sheltered her, however briefly. Women were dismantling lodges, children helping to pack belongings, elderly members directing the work with practiced authority. Despite the urgency of their evacuation, There was no panic, no chaos, just the efficient movement of a people accustomed to mobility and change. Their small party followed a narrow trail that wound through dense woodlands, moving at a steady pace that ate up the miles without exhausting their mounts. The warriors remained vigilant, eyes constantly scanning the terrain, hands never far from weapons. Eleanor rode beside Nathan, her body gradually adjusting to the rhythm of horseback
travel.
The Shawnee had provided her with clothing better suited to the journey. Buckskin leggings beneath her dress, a fringed leather jacket, and a wide-brimmed hat traded from settlers that would shield her fair skin from the sun. "How far is it to Fort Hamilton?" she asked as they forded a shallow stream. "4 days of good travel," Nathan replied. "Longer if we avoid main trails, safer that way." Running Bear, riding ahead, called something back in Shawnee. Nathan tensed, his hand moving to his knife. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, alarm rising. "Fresh tracks crossing our path ahead," Nathan translated. "Shod horses, not Shawnee." The group halted as Running Bear and Swift Elk dismounted to examine the trail. Their discussion was rapid and intense, punctuated by gestures toward the west and south. 8 riders," Nathan explained quietly to Eleanor. "Passed this morning. Heavy horses, deep prints, army patrol maybe." "Or Malone," Eleanor finished, the name tasting bitter on her tongue. Stone Spirit rejoined them, speaking urgently to Nathan, who nodded grimly. "Change of path," he told Eleanor. "Tracks head south toward the main trail. We go east first, then circle back. Adds 1 day to the journey, but safer." The extra day meant additional time for Malone to prepare, to cover his tracks, perhaps even to launch another raid that would be blamed on the Shawnee. But self-preservation had to take precedence. They could deliver no justice if they didn't reach Fort Hamilton alive. As they altered course, heading into denser woodland that would shield them from distant observers, Eleanor felt the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on her shoulders. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a witness, a potential instrument of justice, perhaps even a bridge between 2 worlds locked in a cycle of suspicion and violence. With the carved fox tucked safely in her pocket and Blackfish's token secured in her medicine pouch, Eleanor Blackwood, once a carpenter's daughter bound for Ohio, now something altogether different, rode deeper into a future she could never have imagined, toward a confrontation that would determine not just her fate, but perhaps the fate of peace on this contested frontier. 3 days of hard riding had brought them to within a day's journey of Fort Hamilton. Their path had taken them through terrain few white settlers ever witnessed. Hidden valleys where herds of deer still grazed undisturbed, ancient ceremonial grounds marked by standing stones, pristine streams cradled in the hands of forested hills. Despite the beauty, the journey had been tense. Twice they had spotted distant riders and been forced to seek cover until the strangers passed. Once, in the dark of night, they had frozen in place as a large contingent of mounted men, too many to count in the darkness, had passed less than half a mile from their hidden camp. "Malone gathers men," Running Bear had observed grimly after. "The riders passed. Prepares something big. More reason to reach Richardson quickly," Nathan had replied. But Eleanor had noted the concern in his eyes. Now, as they made camp on the evening of the 3rd day, the atmosphere among the small group was one of tightly controlled tension. They were close, tantalizingly close to their destination, but the final approach to the fort would be the most dangerous part of their journey. "Tomorrow we separate," Nathan announced, as they gathered around the small, carefully banked fire. "Stone Spirit knows Richardson. He and Eleanor approach the fort from the east at dawn, show mark from Blackfish. Request a meeting with the colonel." "And you?" Eleanor asked, not liking the direction of his plan. "Rest of us watch from the hills. Make sure there is no trap." She wanted to object, to insist they stay together, but the logic was undeniable. A lone white woman with one elderly Shawnee warrior might gain entrance to the fort. 5 armed Shawnee men, approaching with a white woman, would likely meet a very different reception. What if Richardson isn't there? The possibility had troubled her thoughts throughout their journey. Or doesn't believe us. Stone Spirit has known Richardson for many seasons, Swift Elk said, his English better than Eleanor had realized. Colonel is fair man. We'll listen. As the others prepared for sleep, Eleanor found herself studying the stars overhead. The same stars she'd gazed at as a child in Pennsylvania, the same stars that had guided the Shawnee for countless generations. So much bloodshed beneath their steady light, so many misunderstandings and betrayals. Cannot sleep. Nathan's voice came quietly beside her. Eleanor shook her head. Thinking about tomorrow, about what comes after. If we succeed, if Richardson believes us and arrests Malone, what then? Where do I go? I have no family left, no home. Nathan was silent for a long moment, his face half hidden in shadow. Many paths open before you. Could return east, start a new life. Could go west, still reach Ohio lands. And if I wanted to stay? The words emerged before she had fully formed the thought. With the Shawnee, I mean. With, she hesitated, with you. His eyes found hers in the darkness, searching. Hard path. Between worlds is a lonely place. I'm already between worlds, Eleanor said softly. Have been since the day you found me. Nathan nodded slowly. True. But the choice must wait until after tomorrow. First, justice. First, justice, Eleanor agreed, though her heart continued to ponder the question long after they had retired to their separate sleeping places. Dawn broke crisp and clear, the eastern sky painted in bands of gold and crimson. Eleanor and Stone Spirit prepared to depart, securing minimal provisions for the final approach to the fort, which lay approximately 5 miles east over open prairie. Nathan handed Eleanor a folded piece of rough paper, a crude but effective map. If there is trouble at fort, follow this. Leads to a meeting place here. He indicated a spot along a river bend. We wait until sunset. If you do not come, we follow. Eleanor nodded, tucking the map securely inside her jacket. The unspoken message was clear. If things went wrong, they would attempt a rescue regardless of the risk. As she mounted her horse, Nathan approached, placing his hand briefly on her arm. Fox walks with you, he said quietly, and so do I, in spirit. The simple farewell carried more weight than any elaborate goodbye could have. Eleanor covered his hand with hers for a moment, then turned her horse to follow Stone Spirit toward the rising sun. They had traveled less than 2 miles when Stone Spirit suddenly raised his hand in warning, pulling his horse to a stop behind a small copse of trees. Eleanor followed suit, her heart racing as she heard what had alerted him, the unmistakable sound of many horses approaching from the south. Down, Stone Spirit hissed, sliding from his mount. Hide horses. They pulled their mounts deeper into the trees, tying them hurriedly before crawling to the edge of the small grove. From their vantage point, they could see a dust cloud moving rapidly along the main trail that paralleled their position, perhaps half a mile away. As the riders came into view, Eleanor felt her blood run cold. There were at least 15 men, heavily armed, riding hard toward the fort. At their head was a figure she recognized instantly despite the distance, a tall man with a beard split by a scar, wearing a brown hat adorned with a turkey feather. Jacob Malone. They go to fort, Stone Spirit whispered, his voice tight with tension. Why? The answer came to Eleanor in a flash of horrible clarity. They know we're coming. The captured scout. He must have told them our plan before he was killed. They're going to reach the fort before us. Stone Spirit's weathered face grew grave. If Malone speaks first to army, tells lies. They'll be waiting for us, Eleanor finished. We'd be riding into a trap. The old warrior considered for a moment, then gestured for her to follow him back to the horses. Must warn others. New plan is needed. They mounted quickly and rode back the way they had come, pushing their horses as fast as they dared through the rough terrain. When they reached the camp, Nathan and the others were already alert, having spotted their hasty return. "Malone," Eleanor said before anyone could speak. 15 men heading for the fort. They must know we're coming." Nathan's expression darkened. "Scout told them before death. My fault. Should have questioned more before council justice." "No time for blame," Running Bear cut in. "Need new path now." They gathered around as Nathan sketched a rough map in the dirt with a stick. "Fort here. Malone approaches from the south. We are here." "Could still reach Richardson," Stone Spirit suggested. "Go north, circle wide, enter the fort from a different direction." "Too slow," Swift Elk argued. "Malone will have hours to poison the army's mind against us." "What if we don't go to the fort at all?" Eleanor interjected. All eyes turned to her. "Richardson is in the army, must follow rules, gather evidence, and process." She pointed to the map. "But Malone is here now, in the open, away from the fort." Understanding dawned in Nathan's eyes. "You suggest we confront Malone directly?" 5 against 15, Wolf Brother murmured. "Not good numbers. Not confronted in battle," Eleanor clarified. "Intercept, capture, then bring him to Richardson." With the bandit leader himself as evidence, Richardson would have to listen. The warriors exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "Dangerous," Nathan said finally. "But it's possible." He pointed to a spot on his crude map. "Trail passes through a narrow valley here. Good place for ambush." The plan came together quickly. They would ride ahead to the valley, positioning themselves on the ridges above. When Malone and his men entered the narrow passage, they would spring their trap, not to kill, but to isolate Malone from his men and capture him alive. "Woman stays back," Running Bear insisted as they prepared to leave. "Too dangerous." "No," Eleanor said firmly, checking the pistol she had carried since the mountain lion attack. "My testimony condemns him. I need to be there." Nathan studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "She comes. Stays with me. Up next, you got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.